Welcome to Tartan and Thistles on Alive with Susan Power, the heart of Scottish music and song.
Very special show here on Tartan and Thistles tonight. The show was recorded at a tribute to Ian Holmes' tunes on Sunday 22nd of July. I got permission to record it live for the show and I'll tell you a bit about it later. Opening the show we have Sandy Nixon, Iain MacCallum on second box, Gordon Young drums, Jim Clark on piano, Shona McFadyen on fiddle and John Sinton on bass. And they're playing the tunes The Bonnie Banks of the Cairn, Jackie Johnston, Gordon Young's Strathspey and the Glen Cairn Reel. Sandy Nixon and the six-piece band. We'll continue now with Charlie Kirkpatrick and the band, and here's Charlie to introduce the tunes.
We'd like to continue now and finish off, this is a wee polka, and was apparently written as they went in to do an LP, it would be in these days, on the Waverley label. Ian had written this tune before, hadn't got a name for it, so it is now the Waverley polka. 2, 3.
All the tunes played by the musicians tonight can be found at the Urt Library Heritage Service online. It's all the W's, View, Dumfries and Galloway.co.uk. In fact, Iain's full collection has been uploaded there for you to enjoy, and some lovely pictures as well. Here next to play for you is Robert Whitehead, Gordon Young on drums, John Sinton on bass and Jim Nichol on piano.
We do a lot of Scottish country dancing playing with our band, so I'm going to do two Strathspeys into two reels. Caliverate Castle, Pat Cushion's Strathspey, the Castlebanks reel, and the last one, Tom Cowan's rank. Two Strathspeys, two reels. Thank you. And thank you very much for including me in this special afternoon. Thank you.
Mitchell here next to introduce the tune, and joining him on stage are Iain MacRobert on drums, Neil Mcmillan piano, Iain Muir on second box, John Sinton on bass, and here we go, Graeme Mitchell.
So we're going to try now a tune, and I hope I've got the pronunciation correct, and Maura will keep me right, because it's for your pet cat. It's called Billy Balsam, is that correct? Yeah. That's a strange name for a cat. Never mind, I hope that this represents in some way Iain's many talents in a Norwegian or Swedish capacity.
Another of our top musicians to join us with Colin Dewar. Colin has Iain Anderson on second accordion, Jim Nichol on the piano, Gordon Young on the drums. When I first met Gordon Young, which was about 70 years ago, between you and me was an old man then. He said to me, "Oh, you come from Dumfries, son?" I says, "Aye." And he says, "You'll ken Margaret and Sherlock." And I hadn't a clue who was talking about. And I said to somebody that was playing, I says, "That old guy that's playing the drums said to me, do you know Margaret and Sherlock from Dumfries?" And he says, "Aye, but do you ken them?" I says, "No, who are they?" He says, "Margaret and Sherlock Holmes, Margaret and Ian Holmes." And I never thought, so any time I've seen Gordon, he always used to say that, before Ian passed away, always used to say, "Mind give Sherlock my best regards." So it was always great fun, and Ian always had a laugh when I told him that story. But here we are, Colin Dewar and the band.
That was a set of Ian's Irish jigs. I've forgotten to write down the name of the first one, so it's in G. The second one, O'Brien's jig, The Lakes of Killarney and Ballycarney. I first met Ian, my dad took me up to Perth Accordion Club, I think I was maybe 14, and I'd only ever heard Ian and the band on the dance music on the radio. So it was one of my great highlights to be able to go up to the club and see a full 6-piece band playing. I mean, it was just, I remember it like it was yesterday. And Ian was always very complimentary and always willing to give loads of advice. So for a young 14-year-old starting off, you've no idea how that just fills you with pride.
They come from audience and peers. Here's Susan down from Falkirk today. Susan McFadyen's leading the band, Shona McFadyen on fiddle, Sandy Nixon is on second accordion, Iain Muir is on the piano, and it's Iain MacRobert on the drums. Shona on the fiddle, Susan on the accordion. The McFadyen sisters.
very much. It's lovely to be here this afternoon to play some of Ian's tunes. When I was looking through the music and thought I wanted to find a tune that would partly showcase the fiddle, so I came across Wee Mary Ellen's Air, and it's an absolutely beautiful tune, and it's one of these tunes that I think we were just talking about it. It works as a slow air, and we play a lot of Scottish country dancing. I think it might end up in my repertoire for a pastoral strathspey.
Here's John to introduce the next band.
Ian Cruickshank, Roddy Mathews, Iain MacCallum, Gordon Young, John Sinton, Jim Clark, the Ian Cruickshank Band.
Duncan MacDonald's march and Ian Holmes' compliments to Jim Parker of Brave Argyle.
Great tunes yet again from Ian's collection. A very talented musician and composer. Isn't it wonderful to hear them? It's Ian Muir's turn on the stage next, and he's up there with Susan McFadyen on second accordion, Shona McFadyen on fiddle, Neil Mcmillan on piano, John Sinton on bass, and Iain MacRobert on drum.
So Queen of the South Polka and Ricky Lowe's Snow.
all ages, and it's great that a young man who is a champion in his own right, along with his dad, Stuart Adamson, on the piano. We're absolutely delighted to have our youngest player here playing his tribute with tunes of the late, the great Ian Holmes. Could you welcome Alastair Adamson?
Great stuff there from Alastair Adamson and his dad Stuart on piano, playing accordion in Switzerland. I'll hand you back over to John.
I take myself back to Crossmichael Hall many years ago to a dance. Bruce Lindsay's band, and arrived and I saw Ian Holmes draw up in the car park, and I thought, have I got the wrong date or something? But no, because Ian was a great admirer of Bruce just as much as Bruce was a great admirer of Ian, and the four-piece band that night was augmented to a five-piece because Ian sat in with the band as if they'd been playing for years, and I always know that that's been a highlight of Bruce Lindsay over many years, but Ian sat in with the band. It's going to be a highlight for us this afternoon to hear and welcome on stage on button key accordion, Bruce Lindsay.
Good afternoon, everybody. What a lovely afternoon we're having, isn't it? John was mentioning Crossmichael, and that same night, well, 2 or 3 days later, I mean, we had some great nights at things like that, like playing Wee and McFadyen and things. And I miss all these old lads terribly, I can't tell you how much I do. But this came through the post, you see, a 6-8 March, Bruce Lindsay's welcome to Crossmichael. I had forgotten all about this. On the back it says, best wishes Ian Holmes. So this is 18th of November 2000. Best wishes Ian Holmes. Note the date. It was the day or the night after we had played at the dance. I came home from Crossmichael and wrote 3 6/8s. Before going to bed. Sight so bad I could not jot them down and whistled them onto a cassette. Margaret awoke and wondered what all the racket was about. Recording for Take the Floor, Cooper on Monday the 18th. Sorry about the scrawl. Remember you might be old and dottery someday yourself. musician in one Pal's tribute to another great musician in Pal. A waltz for Angus Fitchett. Thank you.
Next to take the stage is Iain Anderson, and playing alongside Iain is Iain Muir on second box, Iain MacRobert on drum, and Neil Mcmillan on piano. So here is Iain and the band to play Tony Dalton and Cardenas Castle. band. So from one Iain to the next Iain, here's Iain MacCallum, Roddy Mathews on fiddle, Sandy Nixon on second box, Gordon Young on drums, Jim Clark on piano and John Sinton on bass.
Thanks very much, folks. It's grand to be here again, celebrating the music of a man very well. For the locals here, everybody knows him as the legend in the Scottish national music. You know, I've known Iain a long time and I've got a lot of tunes from him. And I'm quite pleased to see the drummer in the band when I knew him first was this young man at the back here, Gordon Young. And on bass, John Sinton. John started when I started a way back together. It wasn't yesterday. And of course, Jim Clark, everybody knows Jim from that marvellous plate of soup we get if you go down to Jim's place. But no, Jim had a tune a long, long time ago. And on fiddle, the man from over the border, Roddy Mathews. And this young chap sitting on the far side, I've known Sandy for a long time. We've had quite a few tunes together. Sandy Nixon. And this is a tune I got from him a long time ago. And he played it on Radio 4 many years ago. And he called it Janice Reid Polka. So here we go.
Iain MacCallum. Our next and final band on stage was Scott Band. And here's John Caskey to introduce.
We have Scott Band, so give a welcome to Scott. Iain Anderson, Jim Clark, Neil McMillan and Gordon Young. So come on, give a welcome to Scott Band and the band.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That was a couple of 6/8 matches. The first one was Willie Woe of Connell. Willie Woe, of course, played with the original Bobby McLeod band back in the 50s. And the second tune was Ivor Robson's March. I first met Iain when I was in my teens at the Perth Accordion Club, not the same one that Colin Dewar was at because he's a lot older than me. And then he used to send up envelopes of pipe music predominantly. So those two tunes were amongst that.
Well, that was all the musicians that played for the day. Unfortunately, I couldn't fit in every set. We'll maybe have a part 2 and listen to some more sometime. I ain't very professional as editing malarkey, but at least I have managed to give you a tasting of the amazing afternoon we all had. I will now hand you over to Ian's daughter, Morag.
Do you know, every now and again life just provides one of those days when your heart's filled with love and pride. John mentioned pride earlier on, and I can honestly say that I am so proud to be standing here as the daughter of the late Ian and Margaret Holmes, who devoted so much of their lives to music for the enjoyment of others. We heard earlier from Alison, and I'm very grateful indeed to the York Library for taking in not just the tunes, and there's over 500 of them, but the entire collection from Dad's music room at the family home. For those of you who'd ever been in that room, I think it's fair to say it was absolutely filled to the gunnels. So the relief I felt when she came round doesn't even begin to describe it. It would have been almost criminal if I'd had to take that all away and store it up in my attic. Last year I got together with Alison and team to plan this tribute event because I wanted to highlight that the library had the collection, that they were starting to upload the tunes onto the website, and I wanted to do my best to ensure that this wonderful legacy stayed alive and kicking throughout the generations. Which brings me on to our superb musicians. I mean, I have been absolutely blown away by today. I mean, bands getting put together just within minutes of going on stage and playing seamlessly. I'd like to say a special thanks to Scott Band, who's not only been one of our fine musicians, but he's taken a special interest in Dad's music over the years, visiting the library collection and often playing his tunes in broadcasts and at functions. He's been an immense help to me in planning this event, and I really don't think I could have done it without him. I'd like to mention my family, who've been sitting beside me today, and many of them have travelled from north and south. It was a lovely reason to bring us all together, the extended family. And that includes Dad's wee sister, my Aunt Etta, who made the trip here for nothing. Finally, a big thanks to all of you for coming here today to make this day a huge success. I really, really hope you've enjoyed yourself as much as I have. I don't think this right foot has tapped so much in so many years. Really, it's been amazing. And I'm delighted to say that we've raised £850 from the ticket sales for Diabetes Scotland. So very well done. Right, well I think I've thanked everyone, so I'm going to finish now before I start to sound a wee bit like I'm accepting an Oscar. So let me introduce our grand finale, or maybe it's called the Stramash. So all are coming up here to play us final set. Anybody want to guess what they might be? No? The Hills of Tynnan? Yeah. And Thoughts of Bobby McLeod.
gentlemen, a big hand for all our musicians. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance today. Big tribute to the late and the great Ian Holmes, the man, and of course his music.
Alive 107.3, the home of Tartan and Thistles with Susan Power.